Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Twisted Proposal by Victoria Saccenti, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Prologue. This was all wrong. Ethan glared as the casket holding the cherished remains of a life taken much too soon descended at an agonizingly slow pace. Anger and bitter desire for vengeance roiled in his chest. He'd asked for raging storms, gale force winds, and end of the world tsunamis. Only nature's apocalyptic violence was suitable for the gravity of this moment. But nature wasn't interested in his problems, nor did she want to indulge him. A cloudless, Curilian blue sky, bright sunshine, and a gentle breeze mocked his grief. Someone touched his shoulder and he jerked away, muttering insults under his breath. He couldn't tolerate cursory condolences, human touch, or useless platitudes. Nothing could be done to stop this travesty. Dust had reclaimed its own. Sending a last goodbye, he tossed his white rose and turned away without seeing where it fell. Heading for his car, he traversed emerald lawns perfectly manicured to give visitors a sense of peace and comfort. There would be no peace or comfort for him. Settling behind the steering wheel, he spoke to the rearview mirror. In his mind, the hated face watched and listened. Mark my words, the time will come, and you will pay. Chapter 1. Friday evening. The elevator's disembodied voice announced the ballroom level and came to a slow stop. Ethan stepped out and was hit from all angles. The Grand Windermere's reputation among society's elites for no expenses spared luxurious ambiance and decor was justified. Sparkling oversized mirrors, polished marble floors, and beaming crystal chandeliers overwhelmed his senses. An elegant couple wearing the required ball gown and white tie, two of the many unfamiliar guests he'd see tonight, crossed before him and disappeared through an archway to his left. As he followed the pair, the murmur of conversation and the mellow sounds of a string quartet streamed out to him. He reached a set of wide open double doors and took a long, deep breath. He'd made a commitment to attend. There was no turning back. A rush of bitter moments, angry faces, and painful conversations he'd worked so hard to forget barreled his way. He'd avoided these events at all costs, but his father had asked him to take over the reins of the company and come in his stead. And since Rupert Ashford was a generous father who hid his ailments and rarely asked for favors, Ethan didn't refuse. No one paid him any attention as he took in the lay of the land, so to speak. Brown tables with 10 diners apiece were scattered throughout the room. The tables closest to the empty podium had been situated accordingly to seniority, influence, and the wealth of each company. Tonight, a keynote speaker would address the crowd and celebrate the year's highest achievers. There was no end to the hypocrisy of this event. Most of the patrician males engaged in ostensibly civil conversations were lifetime rivals. Their distinguished female companions, wives, and accepted mistresses gossiped about each other. To keep the peace and prevent an all-out confrontation, the host had gone to great pains to spread allies and enemies around. The Big Seven were here, and that included him, the new Ashford representative. Decades of history sat within these walls. Over 200 years ago, the original Ashfords, Auchincloises, Browns, Wolcotts, Armitages, Burnvilles, and Williamses had joined forces soon after the British were defeated and sent home. The consortium was successful in every venture, growing in power and influence in economics and political spheres. If they so desired, the Big Seven could tilt the course of the nation. A well-known fact in their private machinations, which no one admitted openly and Ethan condemned. Some time ago, the names of power had increased to 8. The nouveau riche Rudlows, invited to join as a courtesy to Ethan Ashford's fiancée, Joyce Rudlow, had occupied the last spot on the elite roster. Big mistake. As the Big Seven, including Ethan, later found out, they had invited scorpions into their midst. After Ethan and Joyce's engagement ended, Wendell Rudlow revealed his greedy, venomous stinger. He attempted a hostile takeover of Rupert Ashford's enterprises. As a result, the Rudlows were permanently kicked out. Karma. And Ethan, due to his lack of vision and stupidity, was put on a probationary period. Invitations for Ashford and family switched to Mr. and Mrs. Ashford. That worked fine for him. He'd never been interested in these ridiculous gatherings. The separation and distance allowed him to dig in and learn more about himself. With time, he embraced proclivities he'd suppressed during his engagement. Probation had ended tonight. His father's request had put him at the helm of Liberty Fund Management, the name replacing Ashford Fund Management. The new Ethan accepted the charge. Ethan spotted the open bar and made a beeline for it, taking his reserved seat at the table required liquid nerve from a stiff one, possibly several stiff ones. The bartender took care of him right away. What will you have? Ethan stuffed a $5 bill in the tip jar. I'll take a Scotch neat and a water chaser, single malt if you have it. Right away, sir. A hand fell on his shoulder. Always a great tipper. Ethan would recognize that drawl in the man in a packed room. Ethan turned and smiled. Daniel's red hair could illuminate in the darkest night. He'd let it grow longer, which made the color even brighter. Daniel, glad to see you, cuz. Are we in need of reinforcements? Chuckling, Daniel slid next to him. He signaled to the bartender, vodka tonic, double vodka with a splash of tonic, please. The bartender acknowledged him with a quick nod. More like a whiff of tonic with your vodka, Ethan said. Are you kidding? That's nothing. By the time I join the others, I intend to be properly shit-faced. As their beverages were served, Ethan pulled Daniel to the corner of the bar. Which is your table? I'm sitting with the Browns. They're not too bad, except for when Lyndon dozes off and snores. He shook his head. Plus, his daughter is on the hunt for anyone who'll take her off the spinsters list. Priscilla, there's a shy mouse for you. We've had a few conversations. Daniel grinned. She's as meek as she is vanilla, not to mention naive. If you showed her a pair of cuffs, she'd weep or have a heart attack. I don't need that vanilla crap. My conscience would kill me if I spoiled her innocence. You know where my head is at and the kind of woman I prefer. Of course I do. Daniel gulped the rest of his drink. He held the empty glass out to the bartender. We're much alike, dear cousin. I'm only surprised you haven't taken the next step. Full-time MS? Ethan raised a shoulder. My requirements are specific. The right submissive hasn't come along. Speaking of slaves, did you leave Valerie home? Daniel jutted his jaw toward the doorway. Hell no, there she is. She went to the restroom. Valerie is my dining playmate. She keeps me sane and entertained. I couldn't handle these stuffy gala events without her. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. He'd met Daniel's stunning partner and slave at Club Nexus. Her strapless ruby red gown was painted onto her hourglass figure. As she floated past tables and guests, her Celtic torque slave color gleamed. She wore no jewelry except for her master's symbol of ownership. Men and women eyed her, some with desire, other with envy. His imagination took off. Considering his cousin's proclivities, Ethan was pretty sure Valerie's every orifice had been wired and plugged with a remote control erotic device. That's what he would have done. Now he wished he was sitting at their table watching Valerie squirm, twitch, and keep a straight face while her master turned on and off her intimate attachments. Would you like another? The bartender's question distracted his delicious thoughts. It wasn't easy erasing the image. Valerie's seductive perfume reached his nostrils. Hell, but the woman screamed sex. Sure, Ethan said, combing his fingers through her hair. I'll take another. Shit, 3 drinks would be better. Daniel clapped his shoulder. I get it. She's something else. Temptation on 2 legs. Hey, I know you wouldn't cross the line. I'm not blind, and the chemistry between you two is obvious. I know my slave. Valerie wouldn't mind a threesome. She thinks you're hot. This is so embarrassing. How many drinks have you had? Not enough, Daniel laughed. I'm perfectly comfortable sharing her with you. You're my cousin and an experienced dominant who takes a lady's pleasure seriously. Valerie is so expressive when she's stimulated. It's exciting to watch her. The 3 of us can salvage an otherwise boring night of business and turn it into hours of fun. Daniel grasped Valerie's hand, pulling her close. He murmured against her cheek. Do we invite Ethan to our room? What do you think? Kitten, how would you like 2 cocks buried inside you tonight? Valerie's blush was soft. Lowering her dark eyelashes, she stared directly at Ethan's crotch with a half smile. It was a clear display of desire. He was suddenly spellbound and submerged in deep erotic waters. The pull from Daniel and his slave's seductive foreplay was irresistible. He'd shared submissives with Daniel before. His cousin enjoyed threesomes. Ethan liked the physical aspect, but playing with and seducing the mind and spirit of a sub were his cousin's specialties. Daniel knew how to knot up and unravel a submissive's emotions to the point of wild paroxysm. He could write books about the process, and Ethan had learned much from him. Tonight might be one of those impromptu learning experiences. He'd made no commitments or plans, and an enthusiastic romp with Daniel and Valerie could save his visit to Atlanta. You've taken my head right out of this boring event, Ethan said. True words. Daniel arched a ruddy eyebrow, glancing at his crotch. You'll need a minute before going to your table. When did you fuck last? You can be so crass. Not crass, honest. So when? Oh, hell, 2 days, maybe more. I don't keep count. Valerie giggled, frowning. Frowning, Daniel held her chin. You think this is funny? Her eyes went huge. No, master, please, I didn't mean. She made a garbled sound and stiffened. Daniel must have activated the vibrators to full power. Full power. Trying not to laugh at her predicament, Ethan hid his smile under his hand and glanced away toward the ballroom's entrance. His mind and heart froze. The woman under the archway. Her gaze crossed briefly with his. His breath caught. He dropped his arm. No, it can't be, he exclaimed, his soul filled with blazing hatred. The urge to get close, clutch that pale throat and squeeze until she went limp and lifeless, and his fist overcame all thought. He made a move forward. Ah, shit. Stop, Ethan. Daniel grabbed his arm. It's not her. It's not Joyce. Daniel's words confused him. Ethan blinked and narrowed his gaze. There was no recognition in the woman's expression as she continued scanning the room and moved past him. A man joined her. Going by the strong physical similarity, they were closely related. Siblings? Ethan recovered. He had been ejected from the initial stages of a delicious sexual adventure and thrown into shock and loathing. As fractions of a second passed, important differences, key details, tweaked his initial impressions. Her wide-set eyes were of a clear aqua, not brown. She tied her dark blonde hair, not the same shade of brown as Joyce's, into an elegant twist, which gave her neck a swan-like arch. The pale blue-green of her gown enhanced her aristocratic bearing. Small aquamarine stones in the flowing skirt and sleeves gave her skin a warm tanned glow. She was magnificent in her beauty. She wasn't Joyce Redlow, but the resemblance to her was disturbing. Valerie touched his arm. Are you okay? Better now. I thought I saw a ghost. He had to lie. How could he explain the past and all of the pain attached to such disastrous events? He didn't have enough time tonight. Ethan, that's Siena Maynard, Joyce's cousin. It's freaky how much Siena looks like her. The guy next to her is Bart, her brother and well-known washout. Cousins? He glared at his own cousin. Siena Maynard? Who are the Maynards? Why are they here? I don't know who invited them. Daniel gestured toward the bartender for another drink. The Maynards and Redlows used to be partners. Do you remember Red Rock Investments? Ethan shook his head. The Redlows' business dealings didn't attract him at all. During the engagement period, Wendell, the father, tried to lure him with titles and bonuses. Ethan wouldn't budge since the club venture in Orlando with his friend Kurt was his true interest. After the breakup and ensuing near disaster and tragedy, he blocked out everything related to Joyce and her family's despicable actions. Daniel picked up his drink. I'm surprised Uncle Rupert didn't mention any of this. Why, I've made no secret of my hatred. He slammed back the rest of his scotch and held up the empty glass. The bartender nodded without asking and served him quickly. Raising his glass to the light, Ethan stared through the amber liquid. A sliver of an idea began forming in his mind. But something's there, he murmured thoughtfully. I have to know more about the Maynard woman. What can you tell me? Daniel scratched his jaw. I don't like that look, Ethan. You're scheming. Me? No way. There's no scheming going on. Only curiosity. I mean, look at her. She's almost Joyce's double. All right, Daniel sighed. Siena and Joyce are first cousins. Their mother, Eunice and Martha, were identical twins, thus the resemblance. Were twins? He interrupted. Eunice is dead. That part is coming up. The Rudlows and Maynards owned Red Rock Investments. Good so far? Yes, go on. About 3 years ago, one of the Maynards, I'm sure it was Bart, dropped a huge sum of capitals into Africa's untested emerging markets. Some kind of revolution broke out in one of the countries, and the Maynards lost that investment, but because of the partnership, the Rudlows took a hit as well. He paused to sip his drink. I can guess what's coming. The Rudlows are ruthless. They are, Daniel said. Prior to the Africa deal, Wendell Rudlow had lost capital when he attempted the Ashford hostile takeover. He was hurting for money. Don't fucking remind me, he grated. Wendell tried to recoup his losses with questionable transactions. The Rudlows were accused of insider trading. The SEC opened an investigation but found no conclusive evidence. It didn't matter. He'd already been kicked out of the Big Seven and his reputation was terminally tarnished. You wouldn't know this because you were busy with the club and Uncle Rupert doesn't drag you to these boring events or keep you informed. Joyce escaped the scandal. She met a Spanish executive, married him, and moved to Spain. She lives overseas. And the Maynards? Daniel shrugged. The SEC investigation cost Wendell an additional bundle for lawyers' fees and whatnot. The guy was on the brink of bankruptcy. Enter Bart's ill-advised Africa investment. Wendell sued his partners and the family for every penny they had. He basically sucked the life out of the Maynards. He picked up his drink and took a sip. The parents, Theodore and Eunice, died in a plane crash not long after the debacle. Some theorize it was suicide. The authorities found no foul play, and the insurance policy was awarded. I imagine the offspring are living off that money. Bart is managing whatever's left of the money. Not a good idea. He's a gambling addict. In Siena? I have several ideas and no solid facts to give you. It's interesting and a bit suspect that both were invited to this gala, especially after the Rudlows were kicked out. Ethan returned his attention to the contrast in siblings. The brother was a dark shadow. He resembled Joyce more than his sister. Siena was a glittering jewel, all perfect smiles and delicate beauty, but an innocent face lost to tragedy formed in his mind. His jaw tightened as he followed the Maynard siblings' progress as they crossed the room and took the last 2 chairs at the Burnvilles' table. Do you suppose Bart is peddling his sister to the highest bidder? Daniel chuckled. Not to the Burnvilles. Their oldest son, Ian, is gay and happily married. The youngest is only 15. Must be something else. I want to know why they were invited to this gala, what they're offering, and who's sponsoring them. If the Maynards are anything like their ex-partners, they have 0 scruples. Forget the Maynards, Ethan. They're much too close to a wound that hasn't healed. Shit, it may never heal. You want to talk about wounds? How's Aunt Celia? Daniel stepped back as if he'd been slapped. You know damned well how she is. Leave my mother out of this, Ethan. Siena is not Joyce. Agreed, he snapped. You handled the loss way better than me, but you said it, cause Siena's relationship with Joyce presents a possible opportunity. Opportunities rarely come around twice. Either you act in the moment or it's gone. What do you intend to do? Ethan pressed his lips together. The question momentarily baffled him. He hadn't made a plan yet or taken the concept of strategic retribution very far into the future. Do? Well, The call to dinner interrupted his answer. He'd escaped without revealing his unsated need for revenge. Joyce had hurt him and his family deeply, but what had happened in the wake of her betrayal had been worse and, from his perspective, unforgivable.